All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our weekly webinar. It is Wednesday, and hopefully you all can hear me and see me all right. And I'm very excited to be joined today with a very special guest. Matt Clemens, our CEO, is on with our on the call with us today as well. You should see him just, I think, probably below my face right now. We'll be asking a lot of really interesting questions about cybersecurity as we go through today. So I'm really eager to hear from him, and feel free as you're joining us today, start thinking of some questions you may have. We'll stop a couple times today and solicit and see what questions or concerns you guys have around cybersecurity. But a couple housekeeping things. This is a Zoom webinar, so if you'd like to chat and interact and actually ask those questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. I've enabled all those for everybody, so you should be able to use those. Either one is fine in terms of just putting your question out there. If you're having any kind of issue, feel free also to raise your hand and we'll try to make sure that we take care of it. I'm really excited today too, because we're kind of reformulating an existing presentation that we've sort of done on the road, and now kind of bringing it to our kind of larger customer base. So I'm really eager to get you guys' feedback on everything as well. So today's topic, and we, for those of you that, this is your first weekly webinar, we do a rotating kind of list of topics. So sometimes we cover, deep dives on the platform, or we'll do a getting started training. Sometimes we'll just talk about how to grow your email list, or today, how to stay safe online. So it's a variety of different topics, and we'd love to get your feedback too on the things that are most interesting to you. So feel free to drop me a line on things that you think might be relevant. But I'm really excited today just to sort of start this conversation with all of you guys. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Ryan. I kind of head up the customer success team here at Streamline. You might have seen me in some of the other trainings and webinars that we do. I also want to just always, let you guys know that, support is very nearby. So if you guys have questions beyond today on anything related to the site, technology, cybersecurity, life in general even, you can reach out to us, support@getstreamline.com, or we have a new customer hotline that'll go directly to our support desk, 916-238-1811. And of course, you can always submit a ticket through the platform itself. But I really want to kick off today by announcing our scam watch list, which is kind of dramatic, but I think also really important. I take very seriously kind of making sure that we try to keep you guys safe, especially with regards to the website and things like that. It's something that I've always really wanted to start, like I said, this conversation on, because there are a variety of things that I see over and over and over again. And I would love to make sure that we really just limit the damage that can be done to all of you guys. And that's why I'm really excited to have Mac here too. He's, even beyond Streamline and everything that we've done here, Mac's built a lot of websites, and he can talk to you about all the great large projects he's worked on. He's just sort of an expert in every element of web, design and development and things like that. So I'm just really eager to kind of get a lot of his feedback for you guys too. But here are the 5 things that we're sort of looking at right now this summer that really kind of we're sort of seeing impacting our users. And one of the first ones that I want to talk about today, and we'll kind of go through sort of what these issues are and then talk about how to actually address these things. But the biggest one that I'm seeing is domain registration scams. And I'm guessing that all of you, because I've seen this so much, but I would guess that maybe all of you have gotten something in the letter or in the mail, a letter in the mail that says something like, hey, you need to register for our domain registration service. And you probably wondered, is this legit or not? And I wager in most cases it isn't. We'll talk about what those are. We'll talk about email phishing and what that even means. It's definitely not, throwing out the reel and catching fish. Well, actually, it kind of is, but for the bad guys, not so much the fun kind for you. It's very much, kind of using that sort of spray and kind of, prey method to sort of catch people unaware and getting their information. We'll also talk about suspicious form submissions, which was tough to say when I first started practicing this. So I wanted to make sure I really nailed it there. But it is something we're seeing a lot of through like the contact us form on your site or other forms you may be creating on your Streamline site. You might be seeing submissions come in and you might be going, what does this mean? Is this serious? Is this something that I need to worry about? We'll talk about kind of how to, what kind of heuristic to use to sort of measure that. Social engineering, what does that even mean? Well, it really means, kind of how people can manipulate other people to sort of get access to information. Hacking in most cases isn't, somebody on a computer with like ones and zeros flying across the screen. It's just sort of a phone call that maybe sounds legitimate from somebody that really isn't, or maybe it's a text message from someone claiming to be your boss, but they really aren't. Those types of things. And with AI and other things that are starting to emerge, that is going to become even, more of a challenging sort of vector for these sorts of attacks in the future. And then just generally speaking, third parties and vendors, I think we see a lot of folks working with lots of vendors, and we're one of them too, but the folks that you trust with your data and your information, or you really want to make sure they have a good plan in place and they know what they're doing, because if they don't, well, then guess what? You're in trouble too. So you really want to make sure you're vetting those choices that you make with this lens in mind. If there are other things, like I mentioned, please go ahead and throw those in the chat and the Q&A. If you just please start thinking about those other things you've seen or worried about or been curious about. Even if we don't have time to address it today, I'd love for us to be able to gather that information and then come back to you in a couple months and say, hey, here's how we plan to address those things. I wanted to go through some examples of each of these things really quick so you can kind of see. And then Mac, if you have any feedback about any of this, let me know. But he'll kind of kick off kind of talking about some of the ways that we can address and stay safe from some of these things. But tell me if you guys have ever seen anything that looks kind of like this, where you'll see these sort of mailers that come in, and they'll say things like, hey, you need to, pay $180 for a 2-year subscription to our domain registration service. And you'll be like, I'm pretty sure that we just, renewed our registration through GoDaddy, or, I'm pretty sure Streamline said that they host our domain now, or something like that. If you're starting to kind of wonder about that, please talk to us first before you make any payment on this. If you, or actually just go ahead and tear these up if you feel so inclined, because they'll say in somewhere on there in the fine print, this is a solicitation. All you're paying for is just getting your name on someone's website. Or they might be like kind of weirdly and secretly transferring your domain over. That's what kind of this one over here on the right does, is they'll kind of end up taking over it, but they don't really do anything better than your current domain register, and they just charge you more. So almost in every case, the registration renewals and stuff like that will come directly from the vendor that you worked with before, and usually via email or some other mechanism like that. You're not necessarily going to get like this sort of weird thing in the mail from someone you've never heard of before. Please let us know if you see anything like this. Look on for the fine print that says this is a solicitation. Really read through those things. Don't just automatically assume that you need to pay it. We'll talk more about that, but that's definitely something I see a lot. And I'm just very passionate about making sure these people stop taking advantage of our folks. I've heard a few stories where people have said, oh, shoot, I already paid it. And I just want to make sure that never happens to anyone ever. And Dana is in the chat. We just got one of those last week. They're everywhere, folks. So that's the number one thing, is just rip those things to shreds, because they're just not worth the paper they're printed on. You also might see emails like this. And these are just a couple of examples where, someone might send you a link from kind of a suspicious looking email. It kind of looks okay, but then you kind of see it's a little bit off, and they want you to click in and log in on something, or maybe it's, from, an old boss or an old, a place where you work, and it's, it's asking you to do something in an urgent way, especially, oh my gosh, like click on this link right away and fill this out. And if you're not used to something, just take a moment and really scan it a little bit, because this is one of the most common ways you're going to get attacked, is through email phishing and other types of phishing attacks, which we'll talk about. You also might see some suspicious form submissions like this. And we saw a lot of folks get hit with this maybe a couple months ago, and they come in waves. So you might see these come in, and there might be a couple of other customers that might have seen them as well. And we usually, kind of try to make sure that we address all of it. But there's, in situations like this where someone sent in, a message that says, you're hacked and you have 24 hours to like pay us through Bitcoin, all this money. You haven't been hacked. Please talk to us and we'll kind of, help you understand what's going on there. Your information is public anyway, so this like threat to release this information in the database is sort of silly, because I mean, technically anyone could request it and they would be, entitled to it. So, that's the kind of thing where you really want to just make sure you're pausing and checking before you pay this. You also might see stuff like this, and this is sort of like the, kind of part of having a mailbox open to the public, is anyone can come in and, take advantage of like a current event situation where it might tug at your heartstrings a little bit. And you might want to get some Bitcoin and send it to these poor Ukrainian refugees, except they're probably not Ukrainian refugees, right? They're almost certainly the Russian hackers, like, or something like that. They're the people that are probably causing the problem. So, be on the lookout for those, and we'll talk about how to do that here. And then just social engineering. And I actually love that Mac's on the call right now, because I pretty much feel like every time we've hired someone new, Mac, they get a text message like this where it's someone pretending to be you, asking them to go buy a bunch of gift cards, because that's what you want in life most, is a bunch of gift cards from Best Buy or something. But I just think this is, I wouldn't be surprised if you guys have seen this too, especially when you're hiring, for those of you who have a bunch of volunteers or staff members or stuff. Like, once that information becomes in any way public, it seems like these guys can jump on it and use that as a point of attack. Dominic had a question on here. I just want to read it out really quick. So under form submission email requests about free traffic website, risk-free, SEO free. Oh yeah. So a lot of like, a lot of like marketing type submissions and stuff. You guys ignore them and mark as a spam as a way to archive these types of messages. Great question. In fact, we're working a lot internally right now with our product team on developing some ways to filter out spam messages and things like that. But right now, the best practice is marking it as spam. That should take it out of the normal view of form submissions. And then you can kind of concentrate on the ones that are, kind of in the regular stage. But if you're unfamiliar with that, I can show you. You just kind of click on view edit when you're looking at the form submissions, and then you can update the status there. But we'll come up with some better ways to almost like help you filter those out from the start. And Dorothy mentioned this. I almost fell for this one a couple of years ago. Yeah, we had a couple people almost fall for it too, and then we started like getting a little bit more proactive, and we'll talk about exactly how to address that. But it's so easy to fall for when you're brand new, right? You're like, oh my God, I want to please the CEO. Like, I certainly don't want to tell them no, even if this is a weird thing. I'm here just trying to make things work, right? Mm-hmm. So you end up getting taken advantage of. And then third parties and vendors. And what am I talking about there? Especially when we're thinking about cybersecurity, it's going to be the people that you trust with, your financial data. That's a little bit hard to see, but it's Intuit QuickBooks. Just trust me there if you can't see it. It might be Google if you're using them for email or things like that, or Microsoft or what have you, or even Streamline. Making sure that the systems you're using and accessing, making sure they're safe, that's going to be important for making sure that everything else is safe, because ultimately in this new world that we're in, everything is kind of connected. So
one of the most fascinating facts about that too, Chris, was that with the Target breach that led to the firing of much of Target's leadership, including their CEO, that breach wasn't even done by Target. It was done by a third-party vendor that they're using for inventory and shipping, who lost all of that payment contact. So it was not wasn't even technically Target's fault, but of course they are liable for the actions of their vendors. So yeah, vendor management and access control is so important. And so probably not for the smallest district or whatever, but we want to be really mindful about what we're sharing with third parties and who we're trusting with what.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I'm open to other issues, like I mentioned. Now is a great time to let us know. Put it in the chat or the Q&A. Are there any other things you're seeing or that you're worried about? You don't have to figure it out all right now, but we definitely want to start cataloging those issues and making sure that we put them on our watch list. It's a very important watch list, so we want to keep it updated. But let's talk about, so we've talked about the problems, right? Here are the things we're seeing. How much you actually go about getting ahead of some of these things. And why I'm really excited to have Mac here is he and our national director, Maria, and probably a few other folks. I'm sure lots of people were involved in it, but they've been putting on a really great talk for districts on basically the 10, or now it's 11, I guess, technically, tips to really stay safe online and really making sure that you're keeping your district at the forefront of, just the best cybersecurity practices. And so I'm super excited to jump in here. Dominic had one other question. At the district, vendors are required to update their information on a yearly basis. Oh, they're actually disconnected each year, so they have to check in. That's actually an interesting idea, and probably a good way to make sure that like you really have like, at least a regular interval where at least people are sort of limited. They can't go back too far in terms of their damage. That's really cool. Anyway. Then yeah, so I would love to kind of go through these with you, Mac, and kind of just learn a little bit more about like what these actually mean. Like, what is multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication? And why is that your number one tip on here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to give you a shout out, Chris. I love your 5. I think we should, I think those are really practical for Streamline customers in general. Like, I think those, I just want to reiterate all of those 5 that you mentioned, because I think it's a great distillation of this. This, I think, is more big picture. It's more like IT policy and Yeah, I am very excited to speak to these because I think they just reinforce some of the earlier suggestions you had as well. And yeah, and so to kick this off, this is really very, very common. I mean, every time you go to sign into your bank, or in some cases your email, you will receive some kind of two-factor, or MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. And that's just using more than one source, so that if somebody gets a username and password from some breach, they can't take it and run away with it if they don't also have a connection. And so this is
Right.
a talk we built with TLC Tech, and they provide, they're what's called an MSP, or managed service provider, and they work with organizations on their IT. And so in this case, yes, we see, hey, enter in that code, from your authenticator app or from that text message we sent you. And this is really important. And I'm excited to announce that Streamline is adding this as well for all Streamline logins. You'll see that activated later this year. And we of course have single sign-on and multi-factor authentication on our end, as your administrators, but we're going to add this for each and every user. And just for that extra level of security, we're going to adhere to our own recommendations to you. So
Yeah.
I think that's it's really important. And I would love to hear in the chat, how many of you currently use some kind of two-factor authentication for your email or for some systems at your district?
Yeah, I was actually gonna. I'm glad you mentioned that, Max. I was gonna totally put you on the spot and just be like, so when is Streamline going to announce that for everybody? And I knew we were going to have it later this year, so I was excited to announce that too. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's important to mention too that all of us do have that on our end, so the people that can access all of your sites are definitely very much using two-factor and have all that set up. Currently, though, based on how like people can access and reset passwords, because that's all email based, definitely make sure your email is two-factor authenticated. I think that's the biggest, most important thing right now. And then we'll work on the site itself. That's awesome. So Karen just got that. Dorothy's doing it. Dana's doing it. It's definitely adds a little bit of overhead, I think. And some of you might think it's a little bit of a pain in the butt. I know certainly we feel that way sometimes when like we have to like go grab like because sometimes it's like a key or thing, but most of them run now on your phone or something like that. And so as long as it's convenient-ish, it's usually a pretty reasonable security requirement. And a really important one.
And I think that, and the good systems, they're not a hassle. Like you have to go through that every once in a while, but not every single time you log in, because security used to come at the expense of convenience, but I think that is really dissipated and it's exciting. So I now tell people, it doesn't have to be really painful. And if it is extremely painful, you might need to check in on that vendor. Are they really following the most modern practices? Anyway, I appreciate people's willingness to do that sacrifice. And I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing in the chat with so many folks, getting it enabled.
Yeah, if you have to provide a drop of blood to get in, it's probably too much. So tip number 2 is enable advanced threat protection, which sounds very cool, Mac. What does that mean?
Well, for those of you who are on Office 365 or use Outlook on your phone, advanced threat protection is this neat feature that can actually be enabled on most accounts and most plans on Office 365. And this was relayed to us by TLC Tech that works with a lot of companies. And what they had, this is a response to those nefarious little attachments that come through. And a hard thing with like virus scanners and things is that they don't, once they know about it, then they can add it to the filtration system. But what about those brand new viruses? What about the AI generated viruses or these new ones that, change all the time? How can we make sure that every attachment is safe? So this is something that Google already has built in. So those of you that have Google, you don't even have to turn this on. But inside of Office 365, your administrator can flip on Advanced Threat Protection, also known as ATP. And what that will do is it'll actually test the attachments by opening them on some other computer they have set up. And
nice.
They call it detonation, attachment detonation, which is dramatic. But basically what it means is they'll open all those attachments for you on a virtual computer somewhere, and then they watch. And they don't do anything with the actual content of the attachment. They look and see if anything happens to that virtual machine that's set up. And if it somehow goes outside of the inbox and does things it's not supposed to, then they will block that attachment. And they can run that full analysis in about 60 seconds. So it doesn't slow down your email much, but they just basically do a more thorough inspection of every attachment that you get. It's a cool feature, something that not everyone knows about. And we always just encourage people, ask your IT department, do we have advanced threat protection turned on? It's a great technology and it solved so many things, especially emerging viruses and emergent like bad attachments. So
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, all this stuff is changing so fast that having something just sort of automatically scan it for you is ideal in most cases. And that's why I think when a lot of people do ask us, hey, Chris, we're not happy with our email hosting through XYZ. Who do you recommend? First and second are usually Google and Microsoft, because they've got these features built in. Now, are they a little bit more expensive maybe than some other options? Certainly, but are you getting some premium stuff like this that's going to help guarantee the safety and security of the district? Yes, so you're sort of getting what you're paying for with some of those features. I love tip number 3, because you guys called it be suspicious of email, and then you said email attacks are the worst. That's how I read that in my head. It was just sort of like, yeah, but tell me what you mean more about that. I mean, we talked a little bit obviously about emails, but what are some of the things that people should be suspicious of?
Well, I think it's usually email is like it's such a widely adopted means of communication. It's also a highly broad surface area for attackers to use. And so they've refined their techniques over email. So most of the most sophisticated attacks I've seen have usually started via email. So they are like like our poor employees, that every new employee, as soon as we put their picture on our website or they put on LinkedIn that they now work for Streamline, they are hit within a week like clockwork. And it's a free test we get of their, security training.
Yeah.
And they're always,
certainly,
it's always like some nasty, text or email from me, not actually from me, and we'll speak to that. But they always get asked for gift cards, like, hey, I'm busy in a meeting, I need your help with this. I know you have free time, you just started. Will you do this? And they'll always, fortunately, check in with me about those gift cards. So definitely something to notice. And this is literally one from me, sort of. So, I'm planning to surprise some staff with gifts. Chris is still waiting for these gifts. So they signed from me, but if you look, my email, like in the next slide, we highlight a few little clues.
Yeah, what to look for here. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, and we have to tell employees this, but they're just getting started. They've got a new email box. They're not quite oriented. They don't know me. They don't know my grammar or lack thereof in this email. And so there's a few little giveaways. But yeah, and I noticed that one you showed earlier, that New York City Department of Labor one, like it was from some random Gmail address or something, but in the from, they said Department of Labor at nyc.gov or something as the name. But then people thought, oh, that must be the address. So they do these clever little things to try to get you going to do something.
Yeah, and I think really looking for those clues and not being paranoid to the point where you're doing this on every email that comes in. I mean, that's an overload, right, for our brains. But certainly anytime you feel like you're being asked to do something unusual or that involves money or anything that's outside of the ordinary, that's a good time to kind of go, okay, wait a second. Let me compare the from and really look at the emails and make sure those match. Let me review this language and let me have I ever, I know Mac pretty well. I don't think he'd ever send an email without a comma right here. And he wouldn't say something like this. And he wouldn't, certain things that I can just kind of go, wait, it's like, this isn't right. And I think it's totally a good idea to take a minute and just call that person and double check. And I think everyone will appreciate that, big time, right? And so I did see a question that came in about, and I'm actually curious about this too, about how to enable that ATP feature in Office. Were you able to answer that one, Mac?
Yes, I did. And I just put in the link. There's actually a step-by-step guide published on the BMO Pro website that I thought was pretty good for this. And it has that and a few other tips with Office 365 that includes how to configure your DMARC records and stuff, which we talk about later. So please feel free. I'll drop that in the chat as well. And so I'll send this to everybody. This is how to do some of those tips. So please I think we should probably write a blog article on this as
I was
well,
going to
but
say.
some folks have already written good articles about this, so we'll just put that one in there.
Perfect. Yeah, I think what I was hoping is maybe we'd write up like a little write up. We'd write up a write up. We would do a write up on this after the fact. That way, you guys can kind of read through some of our tips and strategies as well. And I think this is a really important point, Mac, that I want to bring up, is because people are talking about getting spam inside of their contact us, form and those being submitted through the site, and we're working on spam filters for that. You will want to be careful of those links and things that come in. But if you're getting the notification for those in your inbox, try to remember that the notification itself is coming from Streamline. It's just showing you the message that got submitted, but the actual notification is coming from us. So if you mark the email as spam, you might miss other messages from us too. So be careful about marking that as spam. If you have questions around that, please let us know in support so we can just make sure we stay in contact with you. But you will want to mark them as spam inside of Streamline. Okay. Just wanted to put that out there.
And that's it. Yeah. Don't kill the messenger, right? Like we're know about this notification, but if you block us, you'll block us from other things too. And but that, that's one of those tricky things. Like when you get a message about a message, which one do you want to mark as spam? So that's it's very much, very like Inception, like which one are we having to do? So again, when you're not sure, just hit us up and we will guide you through that process and make those filters more robust. Awesome. And again, we're getting into some technical topics here, but I don't want you to feel any pressure to need to learn all of the things that we're saying today. It's only more about like, what do you need to know as a manager or as somebody who's working in a special district about what questions to ask? Because when you ask the right questions, then you empower folks at your district to get the answers and to think about the right things. So we will share all these slides with you. We'll make sure this recording is available. And we just want to give you tools to be able to lead your organization better, to develop more awareness and familiarity with these threats. And then you will be so much safer as a result. But we will get into a few technical matters. And I just want to make sure that, our intent is not, or our expectation is not that you remember each of these technical concepts, but more that the kinds of questions to ask.
I definitely think tip number 3 here, though, is maybe like a little bit tough always to pull off, but I do think like it would be a nice experiment for districts to do from time to time. Tell me a little bit more about some of those strategies and how you might test, though. Maybe making sure people are aware of how phishing works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the best way to test it is to test it. Like you need to check. I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, our staff get tested by these very persistent social engineers that try to get gift cards out of our employees. So, in a way, we're sort of, if they ever do, nobody's ever sent them a gift card. But if we do, it's maybe it's inexpensive training to know that somebody's doing the wrong things. I just want to make sure we learn about it. But the most important thing is that we test on a regular basis. And so we're actually engaging with some companies around this to test our staff now that we've grown. As you know, Streamline's grown from 6 people at the beginning of last year to over 35 right now. And, with all that happening, we need to make sure that technical knowledge, the more employees you have, the more potential, the more you're rolling the dice, and somebody could be really tired and just having a bad day and they click on that link when they otherwise know better. And so we have to stay on top of this. And what I love about these companies, go ahead.
I was just saying, it sounds like there are companies in the districts can maybe, potentially utilize if they're interested in doing that could maybe help them to audit that.
There are a lot of good companies. We don't have any direct affiliation with these two at all, but I'm, bringing them on board in Streamline to just double check us. I know we do our own sort of internal cybersecurity training, but I want to make sure that's taken care of. And what's really neat is they will actually try to phish your employees, and they're actually way better at it than these other these kind of amateurs that hit us up online. And they will even go as far as, I know with one of the companies, they'll leave USB drives in your parking lot. They'll go drop them off, and helpful Good Samaritans will grab them and be like, oh, I wonder who dropped their USB drive. And they'll stick it in their computer. Bam, their computer is now compromised. So, and that company will detect it and, say, oh, so-and-so stuck this into their computer. if we were a malicious hacker, so they're very clever. They'll call your main line. They'll try to get to people. They'll try to worm them out, get information out of them. It's a whole process. So
I see. I think
I
it's
would
smart
just
then that
say that's-
we.
Mhm.
No,
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead, Chris. There's a slight delay.
I was just gonna say, I think it's smart that we have computers that don't have USB drives. Then, think about it. Now we're ahead of the game. But that's pretty crazy. So tell me about this. So I mean, I know people. I bought a house. You have to wire money, or do kind of some of these scary things. I certainly think, like, if you guys are doing anything with wires, I don't know how often districts deal with this, but maybe they do quite often. Definitely call while confirming is the fourth tip here.
Yes, absolutely. And what we have seen is there's a case where there's a what's called a man in the middle attack. It's now revised as monkey in the middle attack, to be fair. And it's basically where somebody can get between your emails. And we watched TLC had this customer where they were going back and forth for a while. And what it was is somebody in the middle had started a communication and then taken the reply and then sent it back to the other person. And they kind of had lookalike addresses both directions. And they were basically intercepting and just resending the message back and forth. And they were standing in between this conversation. And then it came time for the wire information. They changed nothing. They just simply passed the messages back and forth. And so they were part of a trusted rapport. And then as that final wire information came, they just changed the routing number and the account number, passed it along, and $2 million went into the wrong bank account. So it is,
Wow.
it is pretty crazy. And so with that, we always just say, always call your number, because even what they were doing is changing the phone numbers in the signature that was going back and forth. So just make sure you call the number that you have in your own contacts, the number to verify, not the other. And any new vendor or updated change requires that 2-person control, like have one person initiate,
Gotcha.
one person approves. But like every time I send a wire, I text that person that I know through iMessages being like, hey, by the way, it's also this. And I might even call them. And so they hear my voice and know that,
Right.
boy, it's just like 2-factor authentication.
Exactly.
It eliminates 99% of mayhem.
Yeah, $2 million on the line. I think that's absolutely worth it. So this tip right here, I think, kind of like with some of the auditing that we talked about earlier for phishing, it might be something that maybe districts a little bit larger with maybe a little bit more budget can do, maybe not so much for the smaller ones. But even still, I think it's interesting to for people to know sort of what's available and what people do in these situations. So tell me about what pen testing is, and it's not just sitting there writing, with different pens all day, right, and seeing which one is the smoothest. It's something a little bit different, it sounds like.
Yep. It's called, it's short for penetration testing. And it's the point of going into and actually testing a network or testing a website. And, we say, just like, who do you have audit your financials? Not your bookkeeper, right? Not your controller. You always use a third party to provide these assessments. Well, the same is true for security training and network security testing, especially if you have SCADA systems. If you are, delivering water, power, other things like that, you're a target for critical infrastructure. And you want to make sure of a couple things. You want to test, the internal network, and that can be a more expensive proposition. So worth it. It's very, very important. But also that website security scan. So I know we worked with a big district in the Bay Area that did water, and one of the things they found is that they had made all these efforts to secure their website and tested it, but they actually had a little iframe or something that was bringing in some board or an agenda information from an internal system. And that, even though their website was secure, that little frame that was drawing some external information had the IP address of the server inside their network and was publicly accessible, and became a point that it was running a very old version of Microsoft Server, and basically they were able to go in through that and gain access inside their network. So just
Gotcha.
through this little this innocuous board portal that was some internally built system. So what's nice about the website scans and some other things is that they can check your website to make sure that you don't have anything on it that links internally that exposes your internal network. And the network security scans do the same thing. So you just always want to look at the big picture to make sure there's not something that creates a surface area for attack that you wouldn't otherwise expect.
Yeah, it
So
just
we
seems like
found
that
that
stuff
when
is hard to know.
redesigning their website. Yeah, it is. It is. And what's nice with Streamline is like we have a way to kind of flag and keep track of that. So when you're adding, custom HTML or these iframes or stuff, anything that hooks into something else, we do have a way to see that and keep track of that. So that would be something we'd want to look at. But yeah, if you ever need to do that, we perform, if you're on Streamline, you're already getting network security scans and these kinds of things that are part of our due diligence. So we kind of take care of that. But I think the internal network security scans and other stuff, hey, if you want to run one anyway, we always love it when customers share their findings with us, just in case their vendor's finding something that our vendor didn't find. We love that. So feel free to send it along.
It's actually come up. It's funny you mentioned that, because I think at least once or twice I've had customers reach out and say, hey, is it okay if we do this? And we've always been like, sure, go for it. Like, do your worst. And and feel free to let us know what you find. If there's anything we can fix, we'll certainly be happy to do that. This next tip I feel like is a little bit more approachable for everyone. And if you're not doing this might be the easiest thing to start with. But tip number 6, tell us about why we should password protect our devices, Mac.
Well, because it happened to me, like it was really terrible. Not me personally, but like one of my early staff members way back in the day was at Costco, and he left his bag out in the car. And I had put a password on his computer for him, but he got tired of typing it in. He removed it because he was doing something, and that computer was stolen, and it had no password on it. This is like 10 years ago. I was very upset. But you know what? If a lot of IT departments have the ability to enforce this, and the newer computers like really make this easy, but I just remind people, password protect this, your phone, your computer, your devices, please. Such a
it's a pain in the butt, and you feel like it's a waste of time until it isn't, and then it's really serious. This next one though, I feel like I should do this and I don't. But I know you do, Mac. I know you're big on password managers. So sell us on the value of using a password manager, and maybe even tell us what it is first off.
Well, yeah. And okay, it begins with a quiz question. What is the safest password? I mean, it's a bit of a theoretical question, but it's not the word password. But what is the safest password?
The one you can't remember?
Yes, that's it. The safest password is the one you don't know. That's the safest password.
Yeah.
So it's right. So 1Password is one, Bitwarden is one. Like, there are these cool password managers, and it's a great space where you can write down all your credit card information, write down all that other stuff. I know some people, like, they'll put it in a big Excel spreadsheet, or they'll put that somewhere else. But what happens if that's in a shared folder? What happens if that gets picked up? These are trusted systems, and they have some very clever ways of separating the information. Fortunately, like, there have not been big instances of password managers being hacked, because people say, well, what happens if they hack the password manager? And it's like, don't worry, they have really thought of that. That's their number one reason and there's some really smart ways they've separated the information. So so far, these just so outnumber the attacks that could happen in other ways. And so I strongly recommend these. It's so smart for a number of reasons, but there's some side effects that people don't think about. One is, like, when you have staff transitions. So let's say, for example, you've gotten some new staff coming on board, or somebody leaves under not favorable circumstances. It was like, well, what did that person have access to? And, maybe there was that Canva account they had that they were using to make graphics for a website, or they had access to Streamline. And what was those password managers, especially the ones you buy as a district and issue to employees, give you access to see what have they accessed, when did they last access it, and you can rotate all of those passwords immediately and systematically without missing a single website. So that is
what a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a great point. I mean, turnover, we see turnover at districts all the time, and it's such
Yeah.
a huge area of, it sets everyone back. I mean, it's great because you're getting somebody new, but then you have to figure out and kind of pick up the pieces. And this is glue basically to make sure that information isn't lost,
Yeah.
that you can still manage everything, even beyond that. So that's, I think, such a great tip.
And
I
the
don't know if I'm still
second
sold
one,
on it yet. No, but
okay.
I'm just
So
kidding.
number two is that when you go to a website, like I've got my, password stored for my banking credentials. And why people say like, oh, well, something really insecure. Wouldn't you want to be sure you're the one typing in the password? And I'd say no, because there could be a lookalike site that looks like wellsfargo.com or bankofamerica.com or chase.com that looks just like it. Like they could even use a character that if I'm on chase.com, they could use a letter C that's maybe a little bit wider, but it's technically like not exactly the letter C. It's something else that looks just like it. In the domain. I might not see that. I might not catch that. And so what you can do is, or it might be chase.somethingelse.com. And maybe I'm tired or at night and I'm just like, so I just,
Right.
dutifully type in my password, but I've just given my password to some other website. So the password managers don't only store the address exactly, but they store the fingerprint of the security certificate for that site. And so anybody else trying to be that site is the password manager is going to be like, I'm not giving you the password.
Yep.
So if you go to something, you're like, wait a minute, why can't I log in? Don't go typing in your password, and probably because you don't know it, because only your password manager knows it. But you could say like, what is wrong with this website? It gives you a moment to pause and check in and be like, is this actually chase.com? Is this actually the site that I think it is? The password managers are not fooled by lookalike sites in the way that we might be. So just something to consider.
Great point. I mean, and we talked about phishing earlier and the suspicious emails that might look like they're from the right company, and maybe you missed the from in the email, and you actually do click on it. Well, this is another barrier then to make sure you don't fall into those phishing traps. And I think that's just a great reason to use them. Yeah.
Yeah. And that accurate list of systems. So like you've got that person who left and they left and you're like, I have access to their email, but I can't get in. I'm locked out. Why is that? Well, the password manager will remind you that that person signed up 3 years ago before they changed their last name after they got married. And that's why the email is different than the email you have today. And it's like, you would never have figured that out. You would just presume you're locked out of that system. Well, now you aren't locked out of that system. You've got access. So I just think it's a wonderful thing to get in place for future situations where you need to know who had access to what.
Awesome. All right, well, let's keep on rolling here. I know all about A mark and B mark and C mark, but I don't know anything about D mark. So what is D mark? D, as you say there. And why should anyone care about it? I certainly know it's important for things like Engage. Maybe some folks we've talked a little bit about that, but tell us a little bit more about that, Mac.
Yeah. So email is very old technology, and back in the day, there was really nothing to make sure that, like, think of like postal mail. It's DMARC is a way to authenticate the return address. So kind of like how postal mail works, I can say, from the White House, and write that all in. I can throw it in a mailbox in Sacramento and off it'll go to the destination. People will be like, wow, I got a message from the White House, except it's postmarked in Sacramento, California. And then people are like, wait a minute. So DMARC is basically a way to make sure that, it's basically like saying, hey, no BS on that return address. And that does two things. One is that it makes sure, like, when you send email, it won't go into spam. And second of all, when other people send email pretending to be you, it will go into spam. So that's what DMARC is, and SPF and DKIM and all these other abbreviations that don't make any sense. But if you want to check that, you can use that same link that I sent you, and you can also use mxtoolbox.com. You can punch in your the address that you use to send email from, and it will check it, and it'll give you a free report and tell you, are those records set up? And again, all you would need to do is not understand what any of these cryptic technologies mean. You would just
reach out to us.
IT department. You just ask your IT department, hey, I'm getting the, I checked for my DMARC records. on MX Toolbox and it's getting some errors. Are we set up okay? And they'll be very impressed and they'll be like, wow, what's this tool? And then they can go back and forth with that tool and you're not in the middle of it. But then you've just leveled up your security at your district, which is pretty neat.
That's awesome. Well, tell us about number 9, because I don't see why anyone should be careful about what they share on social media. I mean, I've never heard any stories. I've never heard of any stories of anyone getting, fired or in trouble or anything like that based on this. But tell us a little bit about that from your perspective, Max.
Okay, so this is my favorite one, and it's on the next page. How many of you have seen something like this on social media?
I think I might have removed it. I apologize.
Oh,
no, I streamlined our presentation.
Well, thank goodness, because yes,
I'm sorry.
I don't want to ramble on. Well, basically, there's this one like kind of horoscope one, or like it's kind of like an old chain letter where you put up like, what's your favorite flower? What's your favorite this? And it's like, get to know your friends better. But the right answer to that question is like, stop sharing your personal information to allow people to guess your password reset questions. Because many of those are, kind of nefarious, and they say things like, city you grew up in, all this other stuff. Like, don't put that up there. That's how people would reset your bank password. Definitely don't. Be really careful about what you're sharing. I know I have a fake birthday on Facebook. It now doesn't let you change it anyway, so which is good. But I'm just like off by 1 day and 1 year or so, just to make sure that people can't get that information. It's just slightly just throwing them off a bit. So a little misinformation here or there, something that's fairly harmless, but I think you just want to be really thoughtful about what you're sharing externally. It just adds that extra layer of information.
It's a good point, though. Yeah, that horoscope quiz that you're taking, or what's your childhood friend's name and what does that mean for your future love life? Kind of game you saw on Facebook. That's just a great way to basically make it super easy to guess your password.
Yeah, in exchange for some horoscope thing or something. But a lot of those sites, they're ad funded now. They're not like just there for fun. So it's important.
Yeah.
And number 10, but I don't want to spoil the thunder, because on May 31st, Chris is hosting a webinar all about .govs. But it might have to do with the fact that it won't expire, which we've helped. Sadly, more districts than we'd like to recover their domains, because somebody 10 years ago was said, oh, I'll get a 10-year renewal on my domain. Right. So then we never have to worry about it. But then 10 years later, that person's long gone. Nobody knows where that credit card is. Nobody has access to that email, and boom, their .org, and they got no notice, and their .org is gone. And now registered by somebody else who won't give it back, save for $10,000. And anyway, that's why .govs are great. There's so many other good reasons too. But changing domains, it's expensive. It's a hassle. We could talk about that. But it actually doesn't have to be so expensive at all. And it doesn't have to be a hassle at all. We'll give you some tips and we'll talk about this and what you can do.
Yeah, we're super excited for it. And yes, as Mac mentioned, we've helped hundreds of districts through that trauma, and we would love to avoid that as much as possible in the future for everybody. And so definitely join us for that webinar, and we'll be really excited to walk you through some tips. And Carrie, thank you, Carrie, for saying these are some great tips. We appreciate you for joining. And the last tip, I think, is pretty straightforward, and it's something that you guys are all doing already. Yeah, just to keep on learning. And I think the more that you're sort of at least aware of these things, like Mac mentioned, we don't need to walk away today as IT security experts or anything, but just being more aware of these things and starting to ask the right questions if we have IT, if we have, maybe like this is a concern on the board, making sure that these are things that people are addressing or at least thinking about. That way, no one's surprised by any of these things. And I do just want to kind of take a moment, and not to scare anyone or anything like that, but to really urge you to think about the fact that everything that we just showed you here is going to get a lot worse. And attention to these things is going to become more important. And I'm saying that because of AI. AI is going to make a lot of the things that we just talked about, and even the tips that we talked about to combat those things, it's going to make all of that more challenging and more difficult. There are already things around deep fakes you've probably heard about. Anyone that's been on the internet has seen maybe a video that sounds like the presidents of the United States talking about some random topic, but it sounds just like them and it's not them at all. Or maybe you've seen examples of that with, actors or movie stars. There are technologies out there and they're only improving that can take 3 seconds of audio and then turn that into an actual talking person that can say whatever they want and they'll sound just like whoever it is that they capture that audio from. So your vigilance will need to increase is all I'm kind of saying here. And we'll stay on top of those things. We want to, as much as possible, keep you guys informed. That's why we really want you to sign up for the next 2 weekly webinars as well. We'll be doing another one here in a week on ChatGPT, which is, I think right now, probably the most prominent example of AI kind of stimulating human experience and sort of ingenuity. And I think it's something that really has a lot of applications for districts and how they run their website, how they do their business in general. It's going to affect everyone. And we're really excited to talk to you a little bit about that. And then as Mac alluded to earlier, on the 31st, we'll be talking about, what's the deal with .gov, how to apply for these, what's the best way to do that, when to start that process, why it's beneficial, and then answering any questions you guys have. So yeah, I think that was, pretty much what we wanted to cover today. If you have any other questions around any of these topics, but certainly cybersecurity related, please reach out to us. If you're trying to test, some of those DMARC records, you're not sure where to start, reach out to us at support and we'll help you out there. If there's any of the other things that are coming up and you're not really sure where to go to, please let us know. We want to make sure you guys are safe and that you have some peace of mind around this, at least as much as possible in this crazy world. Mac, any other closing points or anything you want to leave everyone with before we wrap up today?
No, I just want to acknowledge each and every one of you who have joined us today for taking time out of your busy schedule to learn more about staying safe online. It will empower your ability to better serve your communities. And we love our districts. We love what you do.
We do.
And we just think it's awesome. And I thank you for coming.
Yeah, I am so proud. I am genuinely proud of our community and how much you guys care. And it means the world to us that, you're trying to do the best for your communities. And we love being a part of it. So thank you all so much. And yeah, have an awesome rest of your day. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.